There is something Edgar Cayce said more than 70 years ago that makes more sense today than ever before, something that if you were born between 1955 and 1975, will stop you in your tracks, because he did not speak about politics, and he did not speak about technology. He spoke about you, about your soul, and about why you came to this planet at that exact moment. What he said was not just any compliment, it was a warning, a mission, and a promise. Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, was the most thoroughly documented psychic of the 20th century. While asleep, he would enter a trance and accurately describe illnesses, past lives, and the future destiny of humanity. More than 14,000 readings were recorded, verified, and archived, and in many of them he spoke about something specific: the souls that would incarnate during the second half of the 20th century. He called them transitional souls, not ordinary souls, not souls at rest, but souls that had waited for centuries to return at this precise moment because before they were born, they knew that the world would need them. And you were born between 1955 and 1975, so Cayce was talking about you. But wait, because this becomes even more interesting. Cayce did not merely say that these souls had a mission, he said that many of them would reach adulthood feeling out of place and misunderstood, with a constant sense that something was missing, that there was something greater they were supposed to do, although no one had explained what it was. Does that sound familiar? Because if at any point in your life you felt that you did not completely fit in, if you felt that the material world was not enough, or if you wondered why you were truly here, Cayce would say that this is not a problem. It is a sign that your soul knows exactly what it came here to do. In this video, you will discover what Cayce specifically said about souls born during this period, what characteristics they possess, what their collective mission is, and why the moment in which you are living right now is not a coincidence. This is not superficial entertainment, it is information that can change the way you see yourself. Stay until the end. What comes after part 3 will surprise you. And if this content interests you, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Here, you will find more knowledge like this every week. It was 1943. The United States was at war, and in a small town in Virginia, a man would lie down on a couch, cross his arms over his chest, close his eyes, and begin to speak. It was not an ordinary dream, it was something that the science of that time could not explain. His name was Edgar Cayce, a photographer by day and a prophet by night. When he entered that trance state, his voice changed. His language became more precise, more technical, and more ancient. He described the inside of the human body as though he were viewing it with X-rays. He named medicines that took doctors days to locate. He spoke about lost civilizations, previous lives, and the human soul with a clarity that left those who listened to him speechless. Most extraordinarily, he remembered nothing when he woke up, nothing, as though someone else had spoken through him. His followers called him a channel. His critics called him a fraud, but the thousands of documents that remained, verified by doctors, researchers, and real patients, tell a different story. They say that Edgar Cayce was genuine. Now, what does all of this have to do with you? During the 1930s and 1940s, Cayce began speaking about something he called waves of souls. He explained that the human soul is not born only once, that it returns, that it chooses, and that there are moments in the history of the planet when enormous groups of ancient souls decide to incarnate together during the same period to fulfill a collective function. These were not new souls, but souls with memories, souls with a purpose accumulated throughout many lifetimes. He spoke about one wave in particular, a wave that would arrive between the 1950s and the 1970s. He said these souls would come into the world during a time of chaos, transformation, and the collapse of old systems, and that many of them would grow up feeling different, sensitive, and uncomfortable with the structures of the world around them. They would possess a natural ability to perceive what others could not see and to feel what others ignored. Why? Because they had experienced all of it before. Cayce described these souls as spiritual veterans, beings who had lived through great civilizations and crucial moments in human history and who were now returning with knowledge engraved within the soul rather than stored in the conscious mind. That is why many of you, if you were born during that period, have that strange feeling, that certainty that there is something more, that profound exhaustion that is not physical, and that search that material possessions cannot satisfy. It is not depression, and it is not confusion, it is the memory of the soul. There is something else Cayce said about this group, and it is important that you listen carefully. He said these souls would face a particular test during their incarnation. It would not be a test of suffering, but a test of choice, the test of deciding whether, in the midst of a world that pushes them towards superficiality, they would remember why they came. Many would reach the ages of 40, 50, or 60 feeling lost, not because they had failed, but because the world had done everything possible to make them forget. However, he also said something more hopeful. He said that when these souls awaken, when they reconnect with their purpose, they possess a capacity for transformation that few generations have ever had. When even one of these souls aligns with its mission, the impact it creates transcends anything the rational mind could calculate, because these souls do not act alone, they act as part of an invisible network, a network Cayce called the plan of the collective soul, and that network is being activated right now. What does that mean for you? What specific role did Cayce assign to these souls in the modern world? That is what we are going to examine in the next part, and I promise you that what comes next will make everything begin to make sense. Cayce was very specific, and that is what made him different. He did not speak in vague terms. He did not simply say, "They will be special people," and leave it at that. He described concrete traits, recognizable patterns, and signs that these souls would carry in their way of being, feeling, and relating to the world. I am going to share 8 of those traits with you. As you listen, pay close attention, because if you identify with most of them, what Cayce said about your mission will change something within you. First, heightened sensitivity. Cayce said these souls would possess the ability to feel the suffering of others in an almost physical way, not because of weakness, but because their souls had accumulated empathy throughout many lifetimes. Many of you probably grew up being called too sensitive, as though sensitivity were a flaw. Cayce would say that it is your greatest tool. Second, discomfort with injustice. You cannot tolerate seeing someone treated cruelly. Something within you ignites, rises up, and refuses to remain silent. That is not impulsiveness, it is an ancient moral code that your soul brought from other lives in which justice was a sacred mission. Third, a spiritual search that began early. Many people born during this period remember asking questions as children or teenagers that other people did not ask. What happens after death? Why does suffering exist? Is there something greater behind all of this? Cayce said that this search is not intellectual curiosity, it is the soul attempting to remember itself. Fourth, difficulty fitting into rigid systems. Corporate jobs, structures of authority without purpose, rules that make no sense, and institutions that oppress instead of liberating. Transitional souls clash with all of these things, not because they are rebels without a cause, but because their souls remember more elevated forms of human organization, and the contrast feels unbearable to them. Fifth, spiritual loneliness. Cayce spoke about this with great compassion. He said that many of these souls would spend significant periods of their lives feeling profoundly alone, not because there were no people around them, but because there were no souls vibrating at the same frequency, no one who truly understood them or shared that same depth. If you have ever felt this way, Cayce would say that you are not broken. You are tuned to a frequency that not everyone is yet capable of hearing. Sixth, a connection with ancient things, lost civilizations, ancient philosophies, and spiritual practices that are thousands of years old. Transitional souls feel an almost magnetic attraction toward all of this, not because it is fashionable, but because they know it and because they lived it. Cayce said that many of these souls had incarnated in Egypt, ancient Greece, and civilizations that official history barely mentions. Seventh, the ability to heal, not necessarily through medicine, but through presence. There are people born during this period who can calm the energy of a room merely by entering it and who can transform someone with a single word spoken at the right moment. Cayce called this the gift of the channel, the ability to conduct higher energy without even being consciously aware of it. Eighth, the feeling that time is running out. This may be the most powerful and also the most uncomfortable trait, an inner urgency, a feeling that there is something you must do, say, create, or share before it is too late. Cayce explained this by saying that these souls possess an energetic memory of the transitional moment that is approaching for humanity, and that memory creates urgency. It is not anxiety, it is purpose searching for a way to emerge. How many of those traits did you recognize in yourself? If you recognized more than 5, I want you to pay very close attention to what comes in the next part, because Cayce also spoke about the specific obstacles these souls would face and, more importantly, how to overcome them.
This becomes deeper. Do not leave.
This is where many spiritual videos fail. They tell you that you are special, that you have a mission, and that you are an ancient soul, and then they remain focused only on what sounds beautiful. Cayce did not do that.
Cayce was honest.
In his readings about transitional souls, he was very clear. These souls did not come to have an easy life, they came to have a purposeful life, and according to him, those are two very different things. He spoke about 3 main obstacles these souls would have to overcome during their incarnation, 3 tests designed not to destroy them, but to reveal what they already carried within themselves.
The first obstacle is self-doubt.
Cayce said that, paradoxically, transitional souls would doubt their own worth more than anyone else, not because they lacked worth, but because they incarnated in a world that measures value in material terms, while their system of values is completely different. Many of you probably grew up being good at things the world does not reward: the ability to listen, the wisdom to remain silent while others shout, and the ability to see the truth in complicated situations. The world told you, that has no value. Find a stable job, be productive, and stop thinking so much. Some of you internalized those voices. Cayce said that the journey back to yourself begins when you decide that your way of seeing the world is not a mistake. It is a perspective the world needs. The second obstacle is draining relationships. Transitional souls possess a natural tendency to attract people who need to be saved, and with all their empathy, they attempt to save them again and again, sometimes for years and sometimes for an entire lifetime. Cayce was clear about this. It is impossible to fulfill a collective mission if your energy is being completely consumed by 1 or 2 people who do not want to heal. Helping is sacred, but there is a difference between helping from a position of strength and rescuing someone from a state of exhaustion. Transitional souls must learn that difference, and according to Cayce, many of them learn it only after ignoring it for decades. If this resonates with you, it is not an accusation, it is information. The third obstacle is the fear of visibility. This is the most subtle and perhaps the most powerful. Transitional souls have something to say, something to teach, or a perspective that could change the lives of many people, but something within them resists being seen, taking up space, and speaking with authority about what they know. Cayce explained that this comes from previous lives in which being visible was dangerous, telling the truth had serious consequences, and wisdom was persecuted. The soul remembers, and in this life that memory is translated into shyness, procrastination, and the feeling that they are still not ready, that they are missing something, or that they have no right to speak about these matters. Cayce had an answer for that. He said that the moment one of these souls decides to speak, create, teach, or share from its authentic truth, it activates a chain of events that reaches far beyond anything it can see. A single voice aligned with its purpose can awaken hundreds of souls that were waiting for exactly that in order to remember their own purpose. This is not vanity, it is responsibility. Now, if these obstacles exist, and if transitional souls face all of this, what is the concrete mission Cayce assigned to them? What are they supposed to do in the world? That is what we are going to examine now. I will tell you something in advance. Cayce did not speak about an abstract mission. He spoke about something very concrete, very urgent, and closely connected to the historical moment we are experiencing today.
Do not go anywhere.
Cayce had a favorite word when he spoke about the purpose of these souls. That word was bridge. Not leaders, not saviors, and not gurus, bridges. He explained that souls born between 1955 and 1975 would incarnate during a pivotal moment in human history, a moment in which 2 eras would overlap: the old era based on control, fear, and separation, and the new era based on awareness, cooperation, and unity. He said that these souls had been sent to facilitate that crossing and to serve as the bridge between what was and what is to come. How would they do this? Cayce was specific about 3 ways. The first way was by preserving ancient wisdom. These souls would possess intuitive access to spiritual knowledge that the modern world had rejected, philosophies, practices, and ways of understanding reality that ancient civilizations possessed and that modernity buried beneath layers of skepticism and consumerism. Part of their mission would be to prevent that wisdom from dying, to keep it alive and transmit it, whether through conversation, writing, teaching, art, or simply by providing an example that demonstrates that another way of living is possible. Many of you are already doing this without calling it a mission. You simply call it what you enjoy doing, what comes naturally to you, or what you feel truly matters. Cayce would say, that is exactly it. The second way was by translating the spiritual into modern language.
This is crucial.
Cayce did not say that these souls should withdraw from the world or live in isolated communities. He said the opposite. He said that they had to be present in the world, in everyday conversations, within families, at workplaces, and in communities, because their function was to translate, to take profound spiritual truths and make them accessible to people who did not yet possess the language needed to seek those truths on their own. It could be a conversation with a friend in crisis that ends with a different perspective, a question someone asks during a meeting that changes the direction of everything, or a shared story that makes someone cry because they finally feel understood. That is not something small. Cayce would say that this is precisely the work. The third way was by maintaining energetic coherence. This is the most difficult to explain in rational terms, but Cayce considered it the most important. He said that transitional souls function as energetic anchors and that their presence on the physical plane, when they are aligned with their purpose, creates stability within the collective field that affects people they do not even know. This is not because they are magical beings, but because a person's inner state radiates outward. When someone lives with equanimity, faith, and the conviction that there is a purpose behind everything, that state spreads. Cayce compared it to a network. He imagined these souls distributed throughout the world, in small and large cities and in rural and urban communities, like nodes within an invisible network. He said that when one node is activated, when one soul remembers its purpose and begins living from that awareness, nearby nodes feel the impulse. That is what is happening right now. The fact that people seek this kind of content, feel that spiritual urgency, and can no longer continue living as though the material world where everything is not a coincidence. Cayce would say that they are nodes being activated. There is something else he said about this specific moment, something connected with a window of time that, according to him, is closing.
A window for what?
What happens if transitional souls do not awaken in time? That is what we are going to explore in the next part, and it may be the most urgent part of everything Cayce left behind. Cayce was not an alarmist, he was precise. When he spoke about urgency, he did not do so to create fear. He did it because he had seen something in that trance state that left him certain that time matters. He spoke about what he called periods of planetary transition, moments in history when the collective consciousness of humanity has the opportunity to make a leap, to evolve, and to move toward a form of existence more closely aligned with what the human soul truly is. He said these periods have a limited duration. They are not eternal, and they do not last for centuries. They are windows, and windows open and close. Cayce identified the period extending from the end of the 20th century to the middle of the 21st century as one of the most important windows in human history, a moment when the accumulation of spiritual awakening, the search for meaning, and the rejection of fear-based systems could reach sufficient critical mass to change the direction of the planet. Critical mass. What does that mean? Cayce spoke of a threshold, a point at which the number of souls living from awareness, love, and purpose overcomes the inertia of collective fear. He did not refer to an exact number, but to a quality, a level of collective vibration that once reached, would sustain itself. He said that souls born between 1955 and 1975 were an essential part of that threshold. They were not the only ones, but they possessed the soul profile, accumulated experience, and temporal position required to act as catalysts. Here comes the part one want you to hear carefully. Cayce said that the greatest risk was not that these souls would actively fail. The greatest risk was that they would remain asleep, reach this stage of their lives between the ages of 50 and 70 carrying exhaustion, disappointment, and disillusionment, stop searching, and convince themselves that it was already too late, that their moment had passed, or that whatever they could contribute was too small to matter. He said that would be the greatest loss, not evil, not active darkness, but light choosing to remain unlit. Why is the present moment so important? Because we are in the center of that window. The world you see outside, with all its chaos, polarization, confusion, and frantic speed, is something Cayce would have recognized. He would have said, "This is exactly what happens when the transition reaches its peak, when the old structures resist with all their strength just before surrendering, and when darkness makes its greatest noise just before the light arrives." At such a moment, what the planet needs is not more voices shouting into the chaos. It needs anchors. It needs bridges. It needs people who have lived long enough to know that fear is not a reliable guide, that depth matters, and that wisdom is a form of service. It needs people like you. Now, all this information is powerful, but if it remains only at an intellectual level, confined to the mind, it serves no purpose. Cayce was very clear about that. He also said that transitional souls possess specific tools, concrete practices that activate their spiritual memory and reconnect them with their purpose. These are not complicated rituals or 30-day retreats, but things that can be done today, this week, within the life you already have.
What are those tools?
That is exactly what comes next. I will tell you honestly that this is the most practical part of the entire video and the part one most enjoy sharing, because it is not enough to know why you came if you do not know how to activate that purpose.
Stay with me.
This is what transforms information into experience. Cayce never separated the spiritual from the practical. For him, spirituality was not something that happened only in temples or retreats. It happened in the kitchen, at work, and during a conversation with a stranger. It was the way you lived each ordinary moment. When he spoke about how transitional souls could reconnect with their purpose, he offered tools that anyone could use, regardless of where they lived, how much money they had, or how spiritual they considered themselves. I am going to share 5 of those tools with you. The first tool is deliberate silence. Cayce was deeply insistent about this. He said that the voice of the soul does not compete with noise and that in a world filled with stimulation, the first spiritual practice is not meditating in a perfect posture. It is creating spaces of genuine silence within everyday life. Spend 10 minutes in the morning before looking at your phone, take a walk without headphones, or spend a moment before sleeping without screens, not in order to avoid thinking, but to listen to what you already know and what the noise prevents you from hearing. The second tool is the journal of recognition, not a generic gratitude journal. Cayce spoke about something more specific, writing down at the end of each day the moments when you felt genuinely useful, not productive but useful, the moments when something you said or did mattered to someone, or when your presence changed something. This is not meant to feed the ego. It is intended to help the soul recognize its own language and identify the moments when you are being the person you came here to be. The third tool is a life review. Cayce spoke about something he called reading your own story, looking back without judgment and observing the patterns. When did you feel most alive? When did you feel most aligned? What kinds of situations ask of you exactly what you are capable of giving? Many transitional souls discover through this exercise that their mission is not somewhere in the future. They have already been living it in fragments. They only need to recognize it and expand it. The fourth tool is a community of resonance. Cayce was very direct about this. He said that no soul can sustain its purpose in isolation and that human beings need mirrors, people who reflect their depth back to them. Seeking community is not weakness, it is spiritual intelligence. It may be a small group, a weekly conversation with someone who thinks deeply, or a space for study and reflection. What matters is that it exists. In today's world, this is more accessible than ever. The technology that often isolates us can also become the bridge that connects us with the people with whom our souls resonate. The fifth tool is an act of conscious service. According to Cayce, this is the most powerful tool of all. It is not service performed out of obligation, nor service motivated by guilt, but service consciously chosen as an expression of who you are. Perform one act each week that brings you no external benefit, something you do simply because you feel it matters, because someone needs it, or because you have something to give. Cayce said that this type of action, when performed from inner alignment rather than from a need for approval, activates something within the soul that no meditative practice can activate in the same way, because the soul comes to know itself through service. There is something that connects all these tools. They are not techniques meant to transform you into someone different. They are practices that help you remember who you already are, clearing away the layers of doubt, exhaustion, and forgetfulness that life has accumulated over something that was always there. Your soul knows why it came.
It already knows.
What comes next is the final part, the conclusion, and I want you to listen because Cayce said something that summarizes everything we have explored today and may be exactly what you most needed to hear. There was one question Cayce frequently received during his readings. People came with questions about illness, money, and the future, but beneath all those questions, there was almost always one deeper question. Do I matter? Does my life matter?
Does what I do matter?
Is there someone, some force in the universe, that knows I am here and cares? Cayce always answered in the same way. He said, the soul that asks that question already knows the answer, because only souls that matter wonder whether they matter. If you have made it this far, if you listen to all of this, and if something said today resonated somewhere within you, Cayce would say that it is not a coincidence. Coincidence does not exist when it comes to the soul. You were born during that period for a reason, not randomly and not as a cosmic accident. Your soul chose that moment, that body, that family, and that context because all of it was exactly what it needed to fulfill what it came here to accomplish. Has it done so perfectly?
Probably not. No soul does.
The human journey is not perfect, it is real. Reality includes detours, stumbles, and years that may feel as though they were wasted in the wrong direction. Cayce said something beautiful about that. He said that the soul does not keep an account of mistakes, it keeps a record of lessons. Every experience, including the most painful and the most shameful, becomes wisdom that can be offered to another person. Suffering that was not in vain is suffering that taught you something you can now give. Think about everything you have lived through, the moments that cost you the most, the losses that changed how you see the world, the crises during which you did not know how to continue, and the dark periods in which faith was the only thing remaining, and sometimes not even that. According to Cayce, none of this was punishment. It was training, and training always has a purpose. You are now in the second half of your life or approaching it, and the modern world has a very strange relationship with that stage. It calls it decline, retirement, or the time to step aside and allow the young to take control. Cayce would say exactly the opposite. He would say that transitional souls at this stage of their lives are at the height of their power, not because they possess more physical energy, but because they possess something that cannot be purchased, studied at any university, or pretended. They have perspective. They have history lived within the body, rather than merely read in a book. They possess the ability to recognize patterns that can be seen only after passing through enough cycles, the ability to recognize when collective fear is exaggerating, to know that the darkest periods also end, and to remember that they have been here before in other forms and that something always continues. That is not insignificant. It is precisely what the world needs right now. The world needs people who do not react from panic, who do not become lost in the noise, and who can say calmly and with genuine authority, I have seen difficult things before, and I know there is something greater behind all of this. That is you. That is what Cayce saw when he spoke about transitional souls, not superheroes, not perfect or enlightened beings, but human beings who have lived long enough to know that life has depth, that love is not naivete, that searching for meaning is not a waste of time, and that wisdom is not a spiritual luxury but a form of concrete service to the world. Here, I want to tell you something that perhaps no one has ever told you directly. You do not need to radically change your life to fulfill your mission. You do not need a grand stage. You do not need thousands of followers. You do not need to wait for the perfect moment, the ideal level of preparation, or a definitive sign. You already have everything you need. Your mission is already taking place in the conversations you have, in the way you listen to someone who is suffering, in the way you refuse to live from cynicism even though the world invites you to do so every day, in your search, in your constant questioning, and in your refusal to settle for a life without depth. That is already the mission. Cayce said it clearly. Not every transitional soul will change the world visibly. Most will change it invisibly through the everyday fabric of their interactions, through the ripple effect of a word spoken at exactly the right moment, through a presence that stabilizes, and through a light that refuses to go out. If you leave here today with only one message, let it be this: it is not too late. It does not matter how old you are, how many years you feel you lost, or how many times you wandered away from the path. It does not matter if you do not currently have clear answers about what to do with everything you are feeling. Your soul has no expiration date. Your purpose does not expire. The window remains open, and every time a person like you decides to remember why they are here, decides to speak from their truth, decides to serve from strength rather than fear, and chooses depth over superficiality, the threshold Cayce envisioned moves a little closer. This is not a metaphor, it is spiritual physics.
Consciousness spreads. Light spreads.
One soul that remembers its purpose ignites something within the souls surrounding it. You are part of something far greater than what you can see from where you are standing today. You always have been. It is time to remember. If anything you heard today moved you inside, do not keep it only to yourself. Share this video with someone else who also needs to hear it, because perhaps that person has been waiting for exactly this message in order to remember who they are. I will see you in the next video.